Hello, I am Jyotika. Welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to discuss how you should write an ERQ for IBPsychology Year 1. To be able to follow my video, you will need a copy of the answer which you can see on the screen. This is because I'm not going to read out the entire answer. My focus is going to be on how you should write the answer. So you'll be able to understand the video fully only when you have the answer with you, and you can pause the video in between or side by side you can look at the answer as I am explaining how to write it. So to download this answer you can go to my website. It is available as a free download. The link to the website is there in the description box and in the pinned comment. I have selected an answer from the cognitive approach because in so many years of tutoring, nearly all my students, barring just one or two, have written cognitive ERQs. I have never had any student who has opted for socio-cultural ERQs, and there were just a couple who opted for biological. So going by the general trend, even I have taken the cognitive approach as an example. And in that I have taken the very first topic, which is their memory, to cover in the ERQ. So this is a very popular question, as you know, models of memory. So let's see how we should be answering this question. To answer any ERQ, and we know an ERQ is worth 22 marks, we should begin by looking at the command term. Many students have developed a misconception that the command term is irrelevant. Now, even when it comes to FAQs, the command term is important in my opinion. I have covered a video on how the command term and the phrasing of the question can determine how you write an FAQ to score in the top band. You can watch that video, I will link it in the description box. But even more so, the command term is important when it comes to an ERQ. So in an ERQ, the possible command terms are evaluate, discuss, to what extent, and compare. Right now we are having a question with the discuss command term, but just I'll give you a brief overview of the other command terms as well, just to tell you how this one is going to be different. When it comes to evaluate, firstly you will notice that evaluate command term is generally used in the case of research or studies that they want you to cover in your ERQ. When it comes to a theory, generally the command term evaluate will not be used. Now when you have to evaluate research or studies in your ERQ, you have to give a balanced perspective. That is, you have to delineate an equal amount of strengths and weaknesses and reconcile them in the conclusion of the answer. I'm not going in much into the depth of this because right now that is not our focus. I just want you to be able to differentiate discuss from evaluate. When it comes to discuss, and generally this command term will be used in front of a theory, you need to know that you have to cover a range of arguments. That is going to be the chief focus of your essay. I will come back to this, but right now you can see, unlike in evaluate, your focus is not going to be about giving balanced strengths and weaknesses. Rather, your focus is going to be on covering a number of arguments, and they could be one-sided, they could be more of a strength or a weakness. That is permitted when it comes to discuss. So there is no insistence on taking a balanced perspective. When it comes to what extent, this command term will be used when they want you to make a comparison across approaches. Though I know compare is also there, contrast is also there for that. I'm sorry, they don't give compare, they give contrast. But when it comes to what extent, implicitly it is still about comparing two or more approaches, because whenever you show that some approach or some theory does explain some phenomenon, you have to show a limitation of its extent by focusing more on its weaknesses, and then illustrating how those weaknesses could be better overcome by some other approach. So that is what to what extent is. Again, it doesn't match with what discusses. So we cannot answer it in the same way that we would answer to what extent type of a question. Finally, coming to contrast. Contrast is when you have to directly side by side compare two approaches. Say, for example, if this question would have been on contrast two models of memory, consistently throughout the essay you would have to contrast two models, say Baddeley's model and Atkinson and Shiffrin's model, point by point. So you would take one point at a time, explain how both of those models stand with respect to that point, then cover the next point, and so forth, and you would be contrasting the two models in every point. So again, discuss is not the same as contrast. So what is discuss about? Let's come back to that. Discuss is about covering a range of arguments, as I mentioned right at the beginning. Now when we see range of arguments, what do we mean by firstly range? So we need to look at it carefully, and this is very important if you want to be able to answer your question successfully. Here I would just like to mention one thing, that some students feel it's a waste of time to get into the nitty-gritties of command terms. That is not true. If you want to score in the top mark band, you will have to write in accordance with the command term. So it is worth giving your time to understand what is required by the command term. When we say range of arguments, definitely we are not talking about one argument. One argument would not count as a range. So supposing I write my entire answer, and in that answer I have not given any argument as such. Like I've just followed a study approach by which I have given details on one model, then I've given one study which justifies that model, then I have evaluated the study, then again I've given another model, I have given one study which supports that model, and then I have evaluated the study. What is the argument in this? There is no argument at all. What point am I making? So when you think argument, you have to think, okay, they've given me models of memory. Now in my textbook I have learned about so many different aspects when it comes to these models. Which ones am I covering in my answer? What is the argument I'm making, or what point am I making about these models? So when you just follow a standard model study evaluation structure and you repeat it into 2 or into 3, then you are not giving any argument at all. You are just simply going on covering whatever is written in the book, and what point you are trying to make is not clear. You must use an argument driven approach, not a study driven approach, at least when it comes to the discuss command term. In any textbook that you are referring to, you will realize that some arguments are given with reference to every theory that is covered. They might not be called arguments in your textbook per se, but for example, when you've learned about the Atkinson and Shiffrin model, you must have definitely seen the author's perspective on how the model is dated, or how the model is not very detailed. What are these? When they bring about these features or these aspects of the model, they are giving you arguments about the model. Those are the arguments that you need to use when it comes to your answers. Okay, so make sure you have an argument in an essay. Don't have an essay that is totally devoid of arguments. Otherwise, you are not meeting the discuss command term requirements. Also, when they say range of arguments, that means you need to have multiple arguments. I would suggest a minimum of 3 arguments. That makes for a good range in my opinion. 2 would be a little less, like I wouldn't consider it a range, and definitely not 1, because that's not a range. So I would suggest giving 3 arguments as a thumb rule, because 3 arguments, firstly, they would make for a range, and secondly, they would also allow you to cover each of the arguments in a fair amount of depth. Otherwise, if you take too many arguments, like let's say you take 6 or 7 arguments in an essay, it would be very difficult to do justice to all. Also, before I begin with the discussion of this, how this answer is written out, so that you get an illustration of how you should be writing this type of answer, I want you to know that the word count ideally for an ERQ is 1100 to 1200 words. The answer that is there on your screen right now is definitely above the 1200 word count. But that is intentional, I want you to know, because if I give you a 1200 word exact or less than that essay, then what will happen is, as you know, you're not going to memorize this essay and write it. That is definitely not going to be your strategy. There's no point memorizing answers. So when you're not going to do that, if I just give you a 1200 word essay, you will find that you're falling short of what to write, because that's exactly what you have learned. And when you go to put it in your own words, we tend to shorten answers when we write in our words, because we don't write exactly the way it was learned. So that's why I always exceed the word count a little, so that you have enough material such that when you're writing in the paper and you shorten it a little bit, even at that time you have sufficient material to write about. Okay. The bottom line is that I have written a longer answer, but when you write, you have to cover it up within 1100 to 1200 words. The maximum limit is 1200. Do not exceed that. Okay, now coming to how I have structured this answer, first I'll explain that. When it comes to structuring the answer, in the first paragraph, I have outlined the arguments that I will be covering in this answer. Because like I said, we need to take an argument driven approach in discussion. And in the first paragraph, when they tell you, in so many websites and so many textbooks, you must have seen that advice, that in the first paragraph you must point out what you're going to do in the essay, or outline the essay that is going to come ahead. Now many students, what they do in outlining the essay, they just mention this theory, that study will be covered. Rather, because the command term is discuss, why not outline which arguments will be covered in the essay? So that is what I make use of in the introduction. There are multiple ways of writing the same answer. Everyone's answer writing approach is different from the other. So I am not saying that this is the way you have to do it. I'm saying this is one of the ways in which you can do it, and it should prove to be helpful to you. So in the introduction, I have pointed out the arguments. I will come back to this and show you what the arguments are. After that, I have covered one model of memory. Now in the question, we can see one or more models. We have an option. I like to cover about 2 to 3 theories or models in a discuss essay. I feel that does justice, but again, that is just in accordance with the arguments that I'm making. So how I've decided to take 3 models in this particular essay is because that is the requirement of my arguments. So my arguments are totally guiding what I'm doing ahead in the essay. So this is just a description of one model. It will meet criterion B, knowledge and skills for the marking. Then I have covered a little bit of evaluation of the model, not of any particular study. And this is a part of my first argument, as I will explain to you later. So this will help me meet the second criterion for scoring, the third criterion for scoring, which is critical thinking. So critical skills I am showing over here. Then I have covered one more model here. It's again a description of that model. Again helps me to show my knowledge. So I meet criterion B. Then I have again come to giving research evidence. I have done a little bit of evaluation also here, but this paragraph is more focused on research. Because this is not an evaluate answer, you will realize that I have not taken research piece by piece and tried to evaluate every independent piece of research. Rather, what I have done is, I have again in an argument driven way given research that will fit into my argument and evaluated it accordingly to make a point. Whatever I have covered from the studies as well as the evaluation that I have done of them, all of them help to support the point that I am making. So from that perspective, I have presented research and evaluation of the research. So you can see, you will not find a typical structure when you see this answer. Study, evaluation, you won't find that structure because I have not followed a standard structure. Every answer that I write, every ERQ that I write is unique, because every argument under every topic is different. So that is why my structure is not fixed. I don't have a fixed format in mind when it comes to the discuss command term, but I make sure to meet all the criteria in the marking scheme. So I do meet the criterion for knowledge and skills, as I've pointed out. I have met the criterion for critical evaluation. Here I have met the criterion for providing supportive research. After this this is also a continuation of research evidence and its evaluation. After this, I have covered one more model of memory. So this is my third model description. And this model, if you're wondering why there were two models earlier and then the third one comes after so much of the rest of the answer is covered, it is because the way the arguments are coming in, the studies and the theories are also coming in line with that. So the studies and the theories also are not in the fixed format, as I've just explained to you. So I have not thought of, okay, let me cover 3 theories first and then 3 studies and then 3 evaluations. Nothing like that. I have presented the theory and studies where it is suitable, where they deserve to be there. That is where I have put them. But that overall has helped me to cover 3 theories. And then, as you know, there should be a conclusion. That's the last criterion. And that conclusion should be in such a way that reconciles the entire answer and connects all the points made back to whatever we have proposed in the beginning. So there's a full rounded conclusion which connects everything that has been jotted down. So that is what I have done at the end. If this is seeming abstract to you, I want to reiterate, that is why I have pointed out right at the beginning of the video that you need to have the answer with you. So if you're finding it difficult to understand what I'm saying, you need to pause the video in between and read the answer. If you want me to go through the whole answer and explain to you word by word, then I'll have to do it in a separate video, because in one video, if I go through every line of the answer and I explain to you how it is written, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to become very long because of that, and my focus will shift from explaining how I've written the answer to explaining the content that is there. So explaining what is memory, which I don't want to do right now. Okay, so now referring to the answer a little, to make this whole process a little less abstract, I will explain to you what made me structure this answer in the way that I have. Firstly, I want you to know that this is just an illustration, so don't take this as any fixed format. If I would have written an answer for another topic, say I would have written for schema theory or thinking and decision making, I would have followed a different structure altogether. It would have not matched this one at all. So I'm not giving you a template on how to write, rather I'm giving you a thinking process, how you should think about structuring your answer. Secondly, even now you will need to have the answer with you so that you can pause and read it in between, so that you can fully grasp what I am explaining to you right now. So what I've done in the introduction is I have defined memory. So now I'm getting more closer into what I have done within the broader structure of the paragraph. So within the introduction paragraph, first a general definition of memory. I just feel it makes for a good beginning to just explain the concepts that have been asked for right at the beginning. It isn't compulsory, you can directly head towards your arguments, but I feel it makes for a good introduction. Also, I have defined what a model of memory is and what purpose it serves, because that's highly relevant to what is going to come next. Whatever evaluations I'm going to make or whatever arguments I'm going to give are going to be relevant to what is the essence of models of memory. Why do we give them in the first place? What purpose they serve? So again, I feel it's good to cover them right at the beginning. So just 2 definitions I have given in the beginning, memory and models of memory. And then straight off, without wasting any time ahead, I have come to the arguments that I'm going to cover. Now I've given 3 arguments and made them explicit before I can cover them, so the examiner knows exactly what's going to happen in this essay. So the first argument I have made is about the comprehensiveness of the models. how the models have sometimes been criticized for having very narrow focuses or less detailed explanations. So that's one. Second argument is related to the research that has been done in the area of memory. So how the research has been highly artificial, that is what I'm going to point out next. And third, I have covered how evolving models of memory have suggested that in fact the traditional models might not be highly accurate. They might be quite incorrect in their inception of memory. So these are clearly my three arguments which I've suggested in the beginning, and now the rest of my answer gets structured according to them. For example, my first argument is about the comprehensiveness of the models. So that is why I have described two models, the first one being the MSM and the second one being the working memory model, to show how the classic MSM has been criticized for not covering enough details of independent storages of memory, and to illustrate through the working memory model how other models have been more detailed. So that's how I decided that okay, first I'll have to describe MSM and then I will have to describe working memory model. So my first argument has determined my next two paragraphs. What I have done within these paragraphs is, in the first I have simply described MSM completely, but not in too many words, not using up too much of the word count that I have, because I need to cover a range of arguments. So if I would have got unnecessarily detailed into MSM, because there's a lot to cover within it, it would have been very difficult for me to give any other argument. The point being, be precise but be complete. Don't leave out on any detail just because you're trying to be precise. At the same time, don't do unnecessary evaluation because you need to fit in the word count. Somewhere you have to have that in the back of your mind. Then I have given the working memory model. I'm sorry, it's not in this paragraph, it's in the next one. I've given the working memory model, and before that, this paragraph which I have given, it is about the criticism of the MSM, like I said, for its comprehensiveness but lack of detail. And once I've made this point clear that what exactly I mean by this, then I have introduced the working memory model. As you know, in your mark scheme, it is always insisted, be it an FAQ or an ERQ, that the essay always has to be coherent, in the sense every point must link back to the previous point that is made. Very simply saying, your two paragraphs cannot be independent of each other. It cannot be that you're putting in random bits of information throughout the essay. So that's not an essay then, because it's not a complete piece of information, it's just a compilation. So to avoid that and to make it a coherent essay, that's why I make sure that whatever I have written, like if I've covered MSM, it should be relevant to what is coming next. And that's the purpose that this brief paragraph in between is serving. In this, I have given the criticism of the MSM and pointed out why the WMM is covering or making up for that criticism and making that criticism even more prominent. So after that, I have described the working memory model. And I just realized that I said that these two paragraphs follow the first argument that I have made. But that was a mistake. These three paragraphs now that are in front of you, 1, 2 and 3, all are relating with the first argument that I have made. So I hope this is clear to you, how the first argument has determined the flow of the beginning of the essay. Coming to the next part now, the second argument is guiding all the research that I have covered and all the evaluation that I have made of the research. Just to remember, my second argument is that when it comes to models of memory, all research has been laboratory driven, in the sense it's been all laboratory experiments. So first of all, to make it clear what I mean by all the research has been laboratory experiments, I have given two examples. One is the Glanzer and Cunit study, which is a laboratory experiment justifying the MSM. And then I've given the Landry and Bartling study, which is a lab experiment justifying working memory model. So that two pieces of research serve as examples for why I'm saying that largely laboratory experiments have been done. And then I have evaluated these two studies. Now here is where you have to be very careful. You will realize when you read my evaluation that I have connected the evaluation totally with the models. I have not tried to independently evaluate the research which has been done. So when I've written the evaluation, my purpose has not been that I have to bring about strengths and weaknesses of Glanzer and Kunitz, and I have to bring about strengths and weaknesses of Landry and Bartling. If that were the case, I would have given very formulaic answers. So I would have just memorized, okay, for example, in this study, generalizability is there, in that study, reliability is there. So I would have followed that grave format and then used Peel to evaluate every individual point, like to elaborate on every evaluation point. I haven't done that. I'm not saying grave or Peel formats are useless. They are very, very helpful. It's just that when it comes to the discuss command term, they are not the most suitable approaches to take. They can help you with some other command terms. So when it comes to this discussion answer, the way I have evaluated Glanzer and Kunitz and Landry and Bartling, if you read my answer, is to show that when I'm arguing laboratory experiments are weakening the type of research that has been done in supporting models of memory, how that serves to be a weakness. Like I have pointed that out in my answer. Okay, so again I want to reiterate, make sure that everything that you're covering in a discuss answer is serving to take your arguments forward, is serving to elaborate on your arguments. There should be nothing irrelevant. Like I just gave the example, just evaluating studies for the heck of it, just showing that I know how to make an evaluation. I can give 2 strengths, 2 weaknesses of every study. Be they irrelevant, like let me give ethics, let me give generalizability. That should not be the approach that you're taking. If you're giving ethics or generalizability, is it relevant to the argument you've made? Like I've made an argument of laboratory experiment. Does it serve to show some problem of laboratory experiments in a way that it points out that the models of memory might not be very accurate? I don't think so. So ethics or generalization is not helping to evaluate the broader picture that we are having in front of us. So that is why I would not take those points here. What happens is, I understand that students put a lot of effort to learn evaluations for, I know I'm digressing a little, but I just want to make this point. So students put a lot of effort to learn evaluations for every study. So say they've learned Landry and Bartling, 2 strengths, 2 weaknesses in Peel format they would have learned. So when they see, okay, models of memory, what comes to their mind? I have learned Landry and Bartling, I just want to write down whatever I've learned in evaluation. That does not make for a good essay. A good essay will be completely relevant. There will be not a single irrelevant point in that. So just keep that in mind. So just because you've learned something does not mean that you have to put it down on paper. You might have an opportunity to put it down, or you might not. Don't force points into an essay that are not connected to it. This is also one of the reasons why I insist that my students understand how evaluation is done rather than memorizing, because then it seems like such an effort. If you know in general what is reliability, validity, generalizability, then while you're writing the essay only, you can put it down on paper, and on the spot you can think and elaborate on why a study is reliable or valid. Because you don't understand these concepts fully, you tend to memorize those points and you feel disappointed when you can't put them down on paper, because you feel I've put so much effort into memorization. So a lot of what we are doing in an essay, it doesn't seem that way, but it gets accumulated from how we've been studying and practicing throughout the year. That's why good study habits are very important. Coming back to the essay, so whatever I have covered till here is all about the second argument, which is how research in the field of models of memory has been very artificial. And then the last argument that I have made is about how the models might not be correct to begin with. So when it comes to the MSM particularly, why it might not be correct, that criticism is found in a model called levels of processing. Now this serves to bring about one more model of memory. So again, it helps me to meet the criterion of showing my knowledge. At the same time, it also serves as a criticism of the model of memory MSM which is given earlier. So it serves for critical thinking as well. So here you can see how the same point or the same paragraph can serve 2 purposes, being knowledge, showcasing knowledge as well as showcasing critical ability. So that's an excellent way of going about in any discuss essay. So this entire paragraph is all about LOP, of course, as much as is required, and with reference to how it brings about the weaknesses of MSM. So again, the golden rule, there is nothing irrelevant in this paragraph. It is totally relevant to whatever has been brought about in the essay before, which is MSM. So everything is linked. Now two things which are coming to my mind, I would like to justify that also, because these are FAQs which keep coming to me from my students. One is, in some websites or some books they have read about, when it comes to the discuss command term, you need to evaluate the theory. I absolutely agree with this. Like what has been suggested and by very honorable professors is that you must, when it comes to discuss command term, at least not just evaluate individual studies but also the broader theory or model that you are covering, and that is very sound advice. My only gripe with this is that students don't take it in the correct spirit. Like the way the professor has put it is golden, but when it comes to students taking it, they misinterpret what is trying to be said here. So when the professor tells you that you need to cover discussion, of course in a relevant way, means when he says you have to evaluate the theory, of course it has to be relevant. So just like when it has been pointed out for the studies, that you don't just evaluate them for the heck of it, in the same way you don't evaluate the theory just for the heck of it. So just because you know, okay, when it comes to MSM, I've memorized these two strengths and these two weaknesses, let me just jot them down, whether it's relevant or irrelevant to the rest of the essay. That's not the approach that the professor has asked you to take. When he says evaluate the theory, it's understood that you need to evaluate it in a way that is aligned with the arguments that you're making. So I have evaluated the MSM, which is my primary focus throughout. When I have given the short-term memory, the working memory model, that is also to show a weakness of the MSM, which is that it is not detailed enough, the independent stores in it are not detailed enough. When I have given LOP, I have given it again as a criticism that the MSM is not maybe conceptually correct in the way it's looking at memory, like it's more categorical rather than dimensional. So in that spirit, you should evaluate the theory. Firstly, you don't need to have a separate paragraph, though I know even that advice has been given, that have one solid paragraph of evaluation of the theory, which is very good again. But that paragraph should be relevant, else you can integrate the evaluation into the complete answer, like I have done. Like I have pointed out limitations at different places. Working memory model, to show the limitation of MSM, I have taken it at the beginning of the essay, and LOP model I have taken towards the end of the essay. So when you have been advised that evaluate the theory also and keep a separate paragraph for it, it's not to be taken literally. It's just an advice that helps you to keep on track with your essay. The professor has not said that you cannot take it elsewhere or that you cannot integrate it into the rest of the answer. That is not what has been said, so don't take it that way, that I need to have a standalone paragraph just evaluating the theory. That's not the intent with which it has been said. So that's one thing that comes to my mind. Another frequently asked question is there a set number of theories and studies that we need to cover? Again, no, because if you see the approach that I have taken, the number of studies or theories you need to cover will depend on how many arguments you're making and what is the nature of those arguments. So of course I cannot prescribe that these many theories or these many studies should only be done. That would be wrong advice, because depending on the topic and what arguments you have selected out of so many which are possible, like I have taken 3 arguments, but there are so many else also which can be made. So depending on which are the arguments that you have selected in particular, and of course which studies and theories you have learned, which hopefully you have learned in accordance with the arguments that you have learned, which you are aiming for. So according to that only studies and theories can be decided. So there can never be a fixed number of how many. Also I feel it's a waste of energy thinking about these things. Focus more on understanding concepts and thinking about how to write well, doing some writing practice. rather than bothering on the counts and trying to follow to find templates for everything. I've given you a broad template, have 3 arguments. That also I've mentioned it's flexible. More than that, looking for very finer templates is not helpful, and the course is not designed in a way to encourage these things. Another question that I'm asked very frequently is which reference book to refer to. All the books in IBPsychology are excellent. It's very difficult for me to pinpoint at one book. I am I'm a very big admirer of the work of Professor Alexei Popov in particular. So all his books I strongly recommend, including the official course book, the IB prepared book, and the study guide which is there. So I tend to follow that a lot. Besides that, of course, Professor John Crane's book and website both are very admirable and very good resources. But this is not to say that other books are not justified. The Hodder textbook by Professors Lawton et al. Is brilliant. Professor Lawton, in whichever board he writes a book, it's always amazing. So I think I would say you can go for whichever book you want. All of them are equally good. Even the websites are very good, including Thematic Education and Professor John Crane's In Thinking. I think the site Thematic Education is by Professor Travis Dixon. I hope I'm taking his name correctly. Very brilliant resource, excellent resource. So definitely you can refer to any book. You need not worry about which book you are referring to. So again, this is not one place where you need to put in your energies. Rather, whichever book you've taken, I know there are too many, just settle on one. Most probably you'll settle on the one which your school has recommended. And in my experience, schools are generally recommending either totally studying from In Thinking, some refer to Cognity, and some just refer to the official book by Professor Popov. All are excellent. It's just that when you're studying, you have to be able to for every topic bring about the arguments which are there. So just make sure in the book you're able to identify which arguments are there, such that you'll be able to take them for your essay and cover them there. You also need to be able to have enough content and evaluation points. Like, content is generally very well covered in every resource. Evaluation points can be a little lacking. So just make sure you have those things in front of you. Also depends what type of student you are, in the sense that some students are very good at doing evaluation by themselves. So for them, just a descriptive textbook would be enough. But for students who need all the guidance on evaluation, something like a study guide and more material would be more helpful. So I would suggest that go for whichever resource. I have not felt personally that for IB some particular resource is better than the other. So I would just recommend all of it. Just make sure it's meeting your requirements. Some of the books which are there, they are very explicit about what arguments can be given and all. So for students who really need things to be pointed out to them directly, those books will be more useful. For students who can uncover implicit arguments and all which are given in a topic, then any book can be helpful. Like I said, go by your requirements, and most of the resources are satisfying most of the requirements. Okay, I just deviated for a moment to cover the FAQs because this is asked a lot. So I don't want you to ask me in the comments, have to ask me in the comments. I just decided to cover it right away. Coming back to the answer, now the conclusion which is there, in that I have definitely summarized all the 3 arguments I've made, but now that I have elaborated on those arguments, I have condensed all that elaboration that I have made into 2 or 3 sentences. So my conclusion paragraph cannot be identical to the introduction paragraph. It cannot be the same as that. I don't have to just repeat and write what was there. Like always, a lighter type of example which is given as a student would say following are the models of memory, and in conclusion you would say above are the models of memory. Of course, it should be meaningful, and as you know, 2 marks are reserved also in the marking criteria when it comes to conclusion. So that is why I have made use of whatever I've written through the essay and included that in the conclusion. As one example, here you can see in the first point I've mentioned, upon closer inspection the weakness of oversimplification becomes evident. So when I say this, I mean that because when we look at working memory model, then we realize that okay, MSM is lacking details when it comes to how short-term memory is working. So because I've explained what working memory is and how it is a criticism of MSM, so now I'm able to make this point here which I could not directly make in the introduction. So conclusion should just draw upon whatever you have written in the answer above. Okay, so this is what comes to my mind right now in explaining to you how to answer, discuss questions. I have done my level best to cover all the common doubts which students have and to clarify those aspects for sure. Also, I've answered some of the FAQs directly. Still, if there's something you need an answer to, you can comment in the box below. And if you're looking for classes for psychology, or if you need your work to be assessed, you can contact me on my contact number which I'm leaving in the description box below, or you can email me. But for any questions related to this video, if you want me to answer, you will have to leave your comment in the comment box below. If you contact me personally for anything that is shown in the video, I will not be able to answer you. And of course, you can leave suggestions on what other types of videos you would like in the comment box below. So let me know anything related to these videos below. I also strongly recommend that you watch my video on FAQs as well, because even that video is in the nature of this video. Even in that one, I have guided you how to answer FAQs rather than explaining any particular FAQs to you. So you can watch that one and this one, and then let me know what other types of videos you would like to see. Okay, having said that, I'm ending the video here for today. Thank you for watching.